This is a remarkable film that magnifies loneliness a million times over. It may also be a video worth watching and reflecting on by everyone, because in truth, most of our lives are spent in the company of loneliness. Whether it's our parents, siblings, children, or friends, more often than not, they cannot always be by our side. They can only exist as thoughts we hold dear in our hearts. By the end of this movie recap, you might just want to go give your dog a big hug. The protagonist, Di, is a middle-aged professional woman living in a bustling city. One breezy and sunny spring afternoon, Di, who was on vacation and longing for a peaceful life, decided to join her old friends Hugo and Luise on a trip to a remote cabin in the depths of the Alps. Along with the three of them was the couple's lively and adorable dog, Lynx, who added much fun to the journey. By evening, the group successfully arrived at the secluded cabin nestled in a valley. The area was lush with greenery, birds chirped cheerfully in the trees, and a babbling brook nearby made it feel like a paradise cut off from the world. After settling in, Luise excitedly suggested that the three of them visit the nearby village to experience the local culture and customs. Surprisingly, Hugo agreed with his wife's proposal. However, Di, feeling exhausted from the trip, decided to stay behind at the cabin to rest. Worried that Di might feel lonely or scared being alone in an unfamiliar place, the couple left their dog Lynx behind to keep her company. After they left, Di had a simple dinner and went to bed early. It wasn't until the sun rose the next morning that she was awakened by the sound of barking. Di got up and found that the couple's room was empty. It appeared they hadn't returned all night. A sense of unease began to creep into Di's heart. She knew that the elderly Hugo had a heart condition, and if something happened to him, Luise might struggle to bring him back on her own. She hurriedly set out with the dog Lynx, taking the path that led to the nearby village to search for the couple. But halfway down the path, she was suddenly blocked by an invisible wall. Di froze, stunned, then instinctively reached out her hand and touched what felt like a smooth, glassy surface. It was as if the air itself had solidified into an invisible wall. She could clearly see the mountain path winding forward beyond it and the forest in the distance, but she and Lynx could go no further. Confused and alarmed, Di turned around, hoping to find another way to the nearby village. The scenery remained breathtaking, but the silence around her was eerie. After walking for a while, she finally spotted a small wooden cabin up ahead. Outside were an elderly couple. The old woman sat peacefully on the porch in the sun, while the man stood by a basin at the door, washing his hands. Di, feeling like she had just found her saviors, ran toward them excitedly, only to be stopped again by an invisible wall. Desperately, she began to pound on the barrier, shouting to get their attention. But the elderly couple didn't react. They didn't move. They didn't even blink. They remained frozen, like two lifeless wax figures. The bizarre scene sent chills down Di's spine. Terrified, she turned and hurried back to the cabin with Lynx. Still, there was no sign of the couple inside. But by now, Di had given up on searching for them. Her only thought was to escape this nightmare. She quickly packed her things, took Lynx, and drove back toward the road they had come from. But before they could leave the valley, the car came to a sudden halt, as if it had crashed into something invisible. Thankfully, both Di and Lynx were wearing seatbelts, so neither was hurt. Then Di realized the same transparent wall had appeared on the road they took to arrive. That's what her car had hit. It was like an invisible fence completely sealing her in with no exit. Before she could figure out a way to escape, night had already fallen. Darkness slowly swallowed the entire valley. She had no choice but to return to the cabin with Lynx, and eventually, exhausted and afraid, she fell into a deep sleep. But in the middle of the night, she suddenly woke up. The air inside the cabin had turned thin and freezing. Breathing became difficult. Panicking, Di got up and tried to go outside for air, but when she opened the door, she was horrified to find yet another transparent wall, this time right at the threshold. Now even the door was sealed. She was trapped inside the cabin. Desperately, she pounded on the wall, screaming for help until her voice gave out. But no matter how loud she shouted, the world outside remained dead silent. No response, no movement, just silence. Fortunately, the next morning, the sunlight once again pulled Di out of her sleep. It seemed that everything from the night before had just been a nightmare. There was no transparent wall outside the cabin door. Relieved, Di felt some of her fear melt away. Daylight now filled the valley, and everything outside looked peaceful and calm, but the terror from the nightmare still lingered in her heart. She decided to go out once more. Maybe she could find another way to escape this place. Before anything else, she returned to the cabin she had discovered the day before, hoping to see if the elderly couple were still there. As expected, the two figures were still in the exact same positions as before. Time seemed to have frozen them in place. Disappointed, Dai turned away and continued along a narrow path, searching carefully for any possible way out. She spent half the day wandering but found nothing. No roads, no signs of other people. Just when Dai was completely at a loss, her dog Lynx suddenly began barking excitedly, then darted toward a grassy slope down the hill. Dai rushed after him and found Lynx circling around a pregnant cow which looked weak and malnourished. Moved with compassion, Dai led the cow back to the cabin and began caring for it carefully. Time passed quickly. More than 10 days went by. Every day, Dai searched the valley for a way out. She walked every trail, climbed every hill, but never found an exit, nor saw a single other person. The couple who had arrived with her had completely vanished. As if they had evaporated into thin air, Dai fell into despair. It felt like she might never leave this terrifying place. Several times she struggled with thoughts of ending her suffering. She felt trapped by endless loneliness and fear. But every time she looked at the adorable lynx and the pregnant cow she had taken in, Dai couldn't bring herself to give up. If she were gone, they would likely suffer too. And in just a few months, the cow would give birth, bringing new life into this strange little family. That thought reignited a flicker of hope in Dai's heart. She decided to stay strong, to survive in this valley no matter what. But first, she had to solve the problem of food. The supplies in the cabin were limited, barely enough to last until summer. Dai needed to act fast and prepare. Fortunately, the cabin had a stockpile of potatoes and a few farming tools. Potatoes grow quickly and yield a lot. If she planted them in time, she might have a fresh harvest by summer. So, without hesitation, Dai began cultivating the open space beside the cabin. Once the potatoes were planted, she spent her spare time writing. She dug out old paper and pens from the cabin and began recording her daily life in the valley. Farming and journaling gradually brought her peace. Her restless heart began to settle. Time passed slowly in this quiet, repetitive routine. Then, one evening, during a summer sunset, the sky suddenly broke into a heavy downpour. Dai sat inside the cabin, when suddenly she heard a strange noise coming from outside. Gripping a small knife she carried for protection, she cautiously opened the cabin door. In the dim light, she saw a small calico kitten curled up on the doorstep, trying to shield itself from the rain. Seeing the tiny creature soaking wet, Dai's heart softened again. She brought it inside and gave it shelter. A few days later, the calico kitten led another cat to the cabin, a beautiful white cat with large, round eyes that sparkled like crystal. Dai immediately grew fond of the white cat and decided to keep it as well. And so it became a strange little household. One woman, one dog, one cow, and two cats. Time passed. Summer faded, and autumn crept into the valley. The landscape became sparse and lifeless, a clear sign that a harsh winter was on its way. Dai knew she had to start preparing. She took a sickle to a nearby hillside and harvested a large field of grass, intending to dry it for the cow's winter feed. She also ventured into the surrounding mountains to gather wild fruits and mushrooms, drying and storing them for food once snow sealed the valley. Meanwhile, Dai noticed that wildlife occasionally roamed through the forest, so she searched the cabin and found the hunting rifle and bullets Hugo had left behind. Without any formal training, she taught herself to hunt. Though each kill brought guilt and sorrow, she often felt like a cruel executioner. Dai understood it was a matter of survival. To make it out of this cursed valley alive, she had no other choice. Though she had slowly adapted to life in the valley, Dai never stopped looking for a way out. Sometimes she would hunt while also exploring deeper into the surrounding mountains. Loyal lynx remained by her side every single day, but no matter how far they went, they could never escape the invisible boundaries of the valley and its enclosing forest. Soon enough, winter arrived in full force. For Dai and her animal companions, it was brutal. After the first heavy snowfall, the entire valley was blanketed in white overnight. The playful white cat, curious as ever, slipped out of the cabin and was found frozen to death not far away. Heartbroken, Dai buried the cat on the open ground in front of the cabin and placed a small wooden marker at the grave. She whispered a prayer, hoping the little one would be happy in the next world. Not long after, new life arrived. The pregnant cow gave birth to a healthy bull calf. It should have been a joyful moment, but Dai had been plagued with worry. She hadn't managed to stockpile enough firewood or food. The fireplace could only be used during the coldest nights, and during the day she had to brave the icy winds and snow to hunt in the forest and keep everyone fed. Her face and hands became frostbitten, and her body grew weaker by the day. But Dai knew she had to endure it. If she didn't, her small family, Lynx, the cow, and the calf, would have no one. Fortunately, no matter how brutal a winter is, it always comes to an end. When the first spring breeze drifted into the valley, Dai not only felt warmth on her skin, but also a flicker of hope rise within her. She made a decision to leave the cabin and find a better place nearby to live. During her earlier explorations, Di had discovered a pasture on a mountaintop. It was bright and sunny with wide open views, and beside a lush green meadow, there stood a small, simple but empty cabin. Compared to the valley home, this mountaintop cottage was far more suitable for spring and summer. So, Di packed up everything, and with all her animals in tow, they moved to the new cabin by the pasture. Standing in the open sunlight, watching the two cows grazing on fresh grass, Lynx happily dashing through the field, and the little calico cat chasing butterflies nearby, Di felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. It wasn't the vibrant, crowded life of the city, but with her beloved animals around, life still felt rich and full of meaning. As summer neared its end, Di once again moved her family back to the valley cabin, preparing early for the long winter ahead. This time, she had learned her lesson. She began gathering as much firewood and food as possible. One day during her preparations, a lonely white crow landed on her windowsill. It looked pitiful, always being chased away and bullied by flocks of black crows. Watching this solitary bird, Di couldn't help but see herself in it, isolated, out of place. Perhaps out of empathy, she began secretly feeding the white crow and silently prayed it would one day find another white crow so it wouldn't be alone anymore. Thanks to her better preparation, this winter was much kinder to Di and her little animal family. They were warm, they were fed. As winter approached its peak, they once again returned to the sunny mountaintop pasture. By now, Di had fully adapted to mountain life. She no longer dreamed daily about escaping the valley, nor did she hope to meet other humans anymore. But fate, as always, had a twisted sense of timing. That day, like usual, Di left the lazy calico cat at home, sent the two cows out to graze in the field, and then took Lynx for a short walk into the woods. On the way back, Lynx suddenly began barking uncontrollably and bolted toward the pasture. Di's heart dropped. Sensing danger, she ran after him, and what she saw in the grass made her freeze. A filthy, wild-looking stranger had somehow appeared in the pasture. Hair tangled, clothes ragged, he was swinging an axe violently, attacking the young bull calf. The mother cow let out a heart-wrenching bellow, as if pleading with the man to stop. Lynx charged forward and clamped his jaws onto the man, trying to stop the violent attack. Di sprinted back to the cabin, grabbed the hunting rifle, and without hesitation, fired. The man collapsed to the ground, motionless, but she was too late. Before she pulled the trigger, the young bull and faithful Lynx had already been fatally wounded. Di stood frozen, staring blankly at the scene. Her heart sank into overwhelming grief, and for the first time she felt no guilt at all for defending herself. On the contrary, she harbored a deep, burning hatred for this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, this so-called fellow human. To prevent his corpse from tainting the once vibrant green meadow, Di silently dragged his body to the edge of the cliff and pushed it off without hesitation. Then, with great care, she buried the bodies of the young bull and Lynx, her faithful companion. She stood silently before their graves for a long time, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face. It was as if she weren't saying goodbye to two animals, but to the dearest and closest family she had ever known. That night, Di cried under the open sky until dawn. Her mind replayed the image of Lynx joyfully running through the fields again and again. At that moment, she felt an indescribable exhaustion, a kind of loneliness that cut through to her bones. The cold autumn wind brushed against her cheeks, a sign that yet another winter was drawing near. When daylight broke, Di returned to the valley cabin with the mother cow and the calico cat. She had no time to grieve. Preparations for winter had to begin once again. In the end, no miracle ever came. Di remained trapped behind the invisible wall. The days repeated themselves in a relentless cycle with no end in sight. When winter returned once more, Di sat in the cold, dim cabin and wrote her final diary entry. The last sheets of paper left behind by the couple had finally run out, and ever since Lynx and the young bull died, Di no longer had the heart to record her days. In her final journal, she believes no one in the world worries about her anymore. Yet somehow she has found peace. The white cat, the calf, the lively and lovable Lynx, they'll never come back, but there will always be new life waiting for her ahead. This story comes from the 2012 fantasy thriller film The Wall, adapted from a novel of the same name written by an Austrian author in the 1960s. It's a story full of symbolism and mystery. To this day, no one knows what the invisible wall truly represents. But in reality, aren't we all trapped behind invisible walls of our own? Walls built by society, by loss, by isolation, or even by our own minds. And like Di, we too often face hardship and change, alone. Sometimes loneliness brings us calm and comfort, and at other times, it brings us oppression and fear. But there's one thing that sets us apart. We are a species capable of healing through forgetting, self-deception, imagination, and tenderness. And that, in itself, is a kind of hope. That's all for today's recap. I hope I brought something a little different to the recaps already on YouTube. And by the way, the protagonist's name is never mentioned in the film. And for the sake of storytelling, I use the name die, which is actually the feminine definite article in German. So yeah, don't ask me about it in the comments.